not 12, and it's from the 2nd century AD, and the second relief has 20 persons in it. Then out of desperation, on an internet article called Mithra and the 12, she is now saying that, quote, the motif of the 12 disciples or followers in a Last Supper is recurrent in the pagan world, including with Mithraism, unquote. She doesn't elaborate on it or anything. She cites an Amazon link that's something called Jesus, A Kingdom Without Frontiers, The Last Supper, which is an animated children's VHS movie that has nothing to do with Mithra. So no, Mithra did not have 12 disciples, or a Last Supper with 12 disciples. Freaking Gandhi try to make excuses but have inadequate sources who make unsubstantiated claims and who speak of things outside of their field. Franz Commont's outdated theory is claiming that the figures were actually Mithra's 12 disciples dressed up in zodiac costumes. How they can make this connection is unknown, as no inscriptions accompany the original reliefs. There's just no evidence for those type of fringe claims. The relief Acharya refers to in regard to a supposed Last Supper with 12 is just some kind of banquet with 6 figures, not 12, and there's no evidence that it was any kind of Last Supper, as no texts go with it. The closest thing is a celebration of a meal Mithra had with the sun god after slaying the bull, but nowhere is this called a Last Supper. But since all throughout history people had supper at a table most of the time and not alone, I don't see carvings portraying eating as any kind of evidence. As for performing miracles, the idea that Jesus' miracles were inspired by Mithra's miracles is rather ridiculous, since Mithra never did anything which equates to Jesus' miracles, such as walking on water, raising the dead, or calming the storms. This could not be called a significant comparison. Zeitgeist says, quote, upon his death he was buried for 3 days and thus resurrected, unquote. There's no mention of Mithra dying at all until the 4th century, and Richard Gordon says directly that there is, quote, no death of Mithras. That's just nonsense. The only reference I could find was every year during the winter solstice, he was supposedly reborn out of a rock. But this tale was added later, and doesn't involve a tomb or a resurrection, but a rebirth, and it's post-Christian. As Dr. Ronald Nash affirms, quote, no claim can be made that Mithras was a dying and rising god, unquote. As for the titles Zeitgeist claims, he was referred to as the Light and the Truth. In Kersey Graves' The World's 16 Crucified Saviors, Chapter 9, Titles and Saviors, he doesn't even mention Mithra as being called the Truth or Light. Acharya claims he is, but cites nothing. She doesn't even say he was actually called these things, she just said he was considered the Truth and the Light. She does not explain why he was considered these things or give any sort of documentation to support it. She just claims that's what he was considered. So what about the astrological claims in Zeitgeist? Was Jesus' birth really just an astrological event?
One of the primary claims of astrotheology is that on December 24th, the 3 stars in Orion's belt align with the star Sirius, and that on December 25th, they all point to the rising sun. Astrotheology claims that the Christmas story is in fact allegory for this astronomical event. They say that the 3 stars in Orion's belt are the 3 wise men, and that they're following Sirius, the star in the east, to the birth of the sun on December 25th. There are several problems with this theory, but the main one, I feel, is that this astronomical event happens nothing like the way that they are presenting here. You can verify this with a simple astronomy program. This image is what it would have looked like 2,000 years ago on Christmas Day in Egypt. You'll first notice that there is no sign of Orion or of Sirius pointing to the sunrise as they have depicted so many times. If we take away the sunlight, you can see to the right of your screen Sirius. Orion is already on the other side of the horizon before the sun rises. This scenario happens much more like they say in different months, like almost any day in October. You can see that as the sun is just about to cross the horizon, you see the stars in Orion's belt and Sirius pointing directly to it. The same thing with almost any day in November. It looks much more like the 3 stars and Sirius are pointing to the rising sun. In fact, it's by December 25th that Orion is completely below the horizon before the sun rises. And to make matters worse for astrotheology, due to precession, which occurs on roughly a 1.25 degree per 100-year timescale, it would mean that 2,000 years ago, Orion would have set about 2 hours earlier, even further before the sunrise. Some proponents of astrotheology claim that on December 24th, Sirius aligns with the 3 stars in Orion's belt. But the problem is that this never changes. Not on December 24th, or not any day in the 365 days a year. In fact, that's why the ancients called planets wandering stars, is because they would move in relation to the stars that would stay the same. This idea that Sirius aligns with the three kings on December 24th, just before the alignment with the sun on December 25th, is misleading at best, especially considering what they're trying to prove to you. There is an attempt by the proponents of astrotheology to try very hard to make the three stars in Orion's belt equal the Magi of the Bible. They've tried all kinds of different ways. Acharya S., a very big proponent of astrotheology, even claims that early Christians called the three stars in Orion's belt the Magi, although she offers no reference for this claim. People have called them the three kings before, but you must realize that if you were to call the three stars in Orion's belt the three kings, it would have absolutely nothing to do with the Bible. For one reason, that there are not three kings in the Christmas story, but wise men, quite different than kings. In addition, there are not three of them. The wise men are not numbered in the Bible, contrary to what most people think. There is also a lot of deception by omission in this story. For example, they would never cite why the star led the wise men first to King Herod and then to the birthplace of Jesus. There's no place for those details in this model, and so they simply don't tell you about it. Moving on. We'll turn to the movie Zeitgeist to explain the general concepts of astrotheology about these two following astronomical claims.
From the summer solstice to the winter solstice, the days become shorter and colder. And from the perspective of the northern hemisphere, the sun appears to move south and get smaller and more scarce. The shortening of the days and the expiration of the crops when approaching the winter solstice symbolize the process of death to the ancients. It was the death of the sun. And by December 22nd, the sun's demise was fully realized, makes it to its lowest point in the sky. Here a curious thing occurs. The sun stops moving south, at least perceivably, for 3 days. And during this 3-day pause, the sun resides in the vicinity of the Southern Cross, or Crux, constellation. And after this time, on December 25th, the sun moves 1 degree, this time north, foreshadowing longer days, warmth, and spring. And thus it was said, the sun died on the cross, was dead for 3 days, only to be resurrected or born again.
This is a series of provable lies. You can download any astronomy program and find this out for yourself. You can go back to 0 AD, or any time really, and find that when the sun rises, it is nowhere near the Southern Cross. And the idea that the sun rises in the Southern Cross constellation at that time or any time is absolutely ridiculous. The Southern Cross is perpendicular to the Earth's rotation and orbit, so this will never happen. In addition, if the sun ever rose in the constellation of the Southern Cross, it would be a zodiac sign. That's how they came up with them. And there's a few more problems. I'll read now from a website called Preventing Truth Decay. Dr. Noel Swerdlow is a professor of astronomy and astrophysics at the University of Chicago. Dr. Swerdlow specialized in the study of the practice of astronomy in antiquity through the 17th century. Dr. Swerdlow writes the following. The stars of the Southern Cross are just visible above the southern horizon in Alexandria and in Jerusalem in antiquity, although I don't think it is visible there now. The constellation was, however, not recognized in antiquity. Why wasn't the Southern Cross constellation recognized in antiquity? Dr. Swerdlow explains. That crux, the Southern Cross, was not recognized as a separate constellation in antiquity, probably because, as seen from the Mediterranean, it is low on the southern horizon, and is surrounded on all 3 sides by the stars of Centaurus, which is a large, prominent constellation. And the 4 bright stars of the crux are included as the stars of Centaurus. So its recognition had to wait until the southern voyages of the 16th century. I would also like to point out that it was the Romans that invented crucifixion. So if the ancients were pointing to a cross in the sky as some sort of symbol of death, it suggests they somehow were anticipating the Roman invention that would happen much, much later. On the point of the sun staying almost fixed for 3 days, on the 22nd, 23rd, and 24th of December, I'll read from badastronomy.com. Although the sun does hang out to the south at winter solstice, it does not hang for just 3 days.